Thank you very much, Professor Ellis. I'm going to try to be very brief. And, you know, when I think about how ALBA came to be, I often think of this song from Venezuelan group Los Guaraguao that says, in Spanish, it says, "No te dejes engañar cuando te hablan de progreso, porque tú te quedas flaco y ellos aumentan de peso." Do not be fooled when they talk to you about progress, because you'll end up losing weight and they will fatten up. And when you think about what was happening, and I'm going to take it closer in terms of the historic perspective, you know, in the 70s onwards, when we know now that there has been an immense growth in inequality in North America and in many parts of the world, but in North America in particular. And this is the time when we saw, you know, ultra-conservative, extremist, you know, right-wing governments come to, you know, Britain, Canada, the United States, and this expression of "there is no alternative," you know, became fashionable. So that every time people try to propose something that would put people first, people's benefits first, they would tell you, there is no alternative. This is the only way to go. The market fundamentalists would say that over and over and over again. So initially it was TINA, as it became known, there is no alternative. And after that, it, you know, with a structural adjustment, privatization, laws that essentially made unionizing very difficult, bringing with it lower living conditions in North America and in many of the Latin American countries as well. Then we had the acceleration of those plans. They hadn't had enough, you know. They were still interested in fattening themselves a little bit more. They still are, exactly. That's the problem, right? Who was it that said, the world is big enough to feed the entire planet, but it's not big enough to satisfy the greed of a few, right? It so aptly applies to the situation in the world. So the next phase was this phase of free trade agreements, which, as we have learned, it was just to accelerate this shift of wealth from the poor to the rich, between countries and within countries. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives just released this essay earlier this month, which shows that even within Canada, you know, NAFTA, what it accomplished was the concentration of wealth in these mega corporations, even within Canada. So this is quite interesting, because every time they talk about what has been the tally of the free trade agreements, they'll just talk to those people from those companies from the Wall Street, Bay Street that Keith was talking about, and they have done really well. So if you ask them, they're going to say, oh, it works well, right? You ask the rest of the people who lost their jobs. So this is what was being proposed in Latin America. This is what was being pushed in Latin America. There was no other alternative. And then these two great men come together and say there is an alternative. And that was ALBA. And ALBA proposed to really, I mean, the slogan is putting people first. And they actually demonstrated it. It was interesting that, you know, Operación Milagro becomes one of these, you know, flagships in the healthcare arena of social spending of these ALBA nations. And they're opening up the eyes of the people of the continent, over 3 million people. Then the investment in education, in literacy, eradicating literacy in many of the countries of the ALBAs and beyond as well. And that's what I wanted to talk about very briefly. I am originally from El Salvador, and I want to talk about, you know, El Salvador not being a member of ALBA, an observer nation of ALBA, and a country whose population is currently very divided between the left and the right, and we know the manipulations that have been going on in order to keep people from switching, you know, in large numbers more towards the left, even though we've had 2 presidential elections that have been won by the FMLN. The majority of the population would benefit from joining ALBA. However, there are, you know, the usual suspects that are getting in the way of this accomplishment. So I just want to talk very briefly about some of the things that ALBA has done in El Salvador. ALBA Petróleos This is a company that was created. It's a joint venture between Inaspas, a Salvadorian company, and Petróleos de Venezuela. And through this company, they have now been able to set up 45 gas stations in the country. It doesn't sound like very much, but the right in tiny El Salvador has been up in arms because of the fact that the little country is getting foreign investment, something that they've always wanted. But this time it's coming from Venezuela, the foreign investment. And with the profits that are made from ALBA Petróleos, now we have ALBA Alimentos. So now we're going from oil to food. We're going from oil to agricultural products in tiny El Salvador, which is still not a formal member of ALBA. I am pleased to tell you that within days of the election of the current president from the FMLN, El Salvador joined Petrocaribe in June of 2014. So this is great news for us because we're seeing the spin-offs. So we're moving from oil to culture to food and now to medicine. Because one of the things that was happening in El Salvador is that we've had this extreme neoliberal model in place for decades, and this tiny country with the lowest social spending in the hemisphere prior to the arrival of the FMLN at the national scene was paying the highest prices for medications in the Americas. So very ironic. So ALBA Salud enters the equation. And clearly we know where that is going to take prices, in addition to what the FMLN government has been doing. They're going to go down. So the right is up in arms. Because, why? Because they're getting foreign investment, but the profits are not being, siphoned off to the north. The profits are being reinvested, and people are taking notice. So 45 gas stations are putting the right, at their wits' end. One of the things they did just under 2 years ago is they took ALBA Petróleos to court because ALBA Petróleos was going to be purchasing 8 other gas stations. So they were thinking that here we have ALBA now, this monster that's coming to take over all of these gas stations and essentially control the market in El Salvador. So seeing that we have no national oil companies, whose interest was the right protecting when they were doing that? I'm pleased to tell you that currently ALBA Petróleos represents 11% of the market in El Salvador. And the right, still talking about market monopoly by ALBA Petróleos, but surprisingly silent about the fact that Citgo, which is also a Venezuelan gas distributor in the United States, has over 100,000 gas stations in the US. Yes. So I thought it was interesting to share this with you. I am hopeful that, that the government of El Salvador will, in due course, join ALBA so that we can participate more actively because, frankly, there is no alternative.